So, ladies and gentlemen, you may have heard, or more likely you did not hear if you were listening to the mainstream corporate media because they really didn't cover this hardly at all. But if you follow progressive media, you probably heard that this last Sunday was actually the 4-year anniversary of the beginning of the Gulf oil spill, the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, where 11 workers were killed, where over some 210 million gallons of oil were spilled into the Gulf, the biggest environmental disaster in our country's history. I say it was the beginning of the spill because the spill lasted some 87 days. So, 4 years removed, the question is, where are we now? How has the cleanup gone? How has the Gulf recovered? And the answer to that question is not really very good, and it also sort of depends on who you ask, right? So the New York Times is actually reporting that BP, the company responsible for the thing, along with Halliburton, also BP thinks that the recovery is going just great. They think it's going wonderful. Reading from the New York Times, quote, "The cleanup efforts on the Gulf Coast in response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill have entered a new phase, with the oil company BP announcing that it is ending its active cleanup of Louisiana's coast almost 4 years after the disaster," end quote. So BP made this big deal. They released a giant press release. They said that they have reached a milestone. They celebrated. They say this is great. We have reached the end of active cleanup. It is the end of active cleanup, BP says. However, ladies and gentlemen, the Coast Guard actually has another opinion. In fact, the Coast Guard coordinator for the Deepwater Horizon cleanup, a man named Captain Thomas Sparks, actually said in a statement, quote, "Let me be absolutely clear. This response is not over, not by a long shot. The transition to the middle response process does not end cleanup operations, and we continue to hold the responsible party accountable for Deepwater Horizon cleanup costs," end quote. That sounds a little less exciting. That sounds a little less complete. It sounds like there's still a lot more to do, and there is. In fact, further on in the Coast Guard statement, Sparks went on to say, quote, "Whenever an NRC case is initiated anywhere in the Gulf, which happens virtually every day, active cleanup operations are undertaken, and we go out and clean up the oil," end quote. So the Coast Guard is saying that virtually every day, active cleanup operations are undertaken in the Gulf. Virtually every day, because the oil is still out there. It's still out there, but BP says, oh, active cleanup is over. Ridiculous. So not only is BP saying things are going wonderful, they also, things are going perfect. The Financial Times actually has a report on how BP is actually trying to get out of paying for environmental studies that it agreed to fund. Reading from the Financial Times, quote, "The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a U.S. government agency, wrote to BP last July asking for almost $148 million to pay for injury assessment and restoration planning activities, including the funding of $2.2 million for research into the recovery of coastal wetlands, more than $10 million for dolphins and whales, and $22 million for oysters," end quote. BP's response to that request? Nah, we don't want to pay for that. We don't want to pay for that. So BP is not only saying that the active cleanup is over, which it's not, BP is actually backing out of studies that it agreed to fund. Not only that, speaking of oysters, which is what they wanted some money for a report on the oyster thing in the Gulf. A Gulf oyster fisherman named Byron Ancalade was interviewed by the Huffington Post about the recovery, and he said, quote, "We haven't started to recover. We're 4 years out now, and we haven't saw the first sign, and most of the businesses I know, my business is at 100% loss. Right now, we're solely relying on BP to keep its word, something they haven't been doing. The oysters are not recovering," end quote. Pretty bleak. He's not the only one who's found this. Again, this whole area of oysters, they say there's just no oysters in this area anymore after the spill. So how did BP reply to this guy's claim about oysters? BP replied by saying, quote, multiple sources of data indicate that oil and dispersant compounds did not affect oyster populations in 2010 after the spill occurred. A Louisiana report from 2010 after the spill states that no direct oiling of sampled reefs was noted during annual sampling of public oyster seed grounds in Louisiana. Field notes from 2010, 11, and 12 NRD sampling do not document a single visibly oiled oyster bed. End quote. So they say that the oysters are fine, and it's not the oil spill's fault. How did the fishermen reply to that statement from BP? The fishermen said, quote, well, I'm going to say this, and God knows I'm tired of being politically correct. BP's lying. I was out there on that boat. That's one of the biggest lies ever told. End quote. So they're trying to get out of their obligations when it came to the spill, to the fishermen. And again, this is something that, again, a lot of the damage, I mean, the oil damage was bad enough, but the real damage was the dispersant, which we've talked about on the show. This ridiculous chemical which has done unbelievable damage to the wildlife that in the Gulf. Actually, BP is dragging its feet on payouts it agreed to, while they're also resuming business as usual. Farron Cousins at the Smog blog reported that BP has made a net income of $38 billion over the last 3 years, so they're doing okay. But what about the damage? Let's go back and talk about some of the damage in addition to the oysters. Reading from Farron's report at the Smog blog, quote, shrimp and small crustacean populations have dwindled as a result of the spill, and many of the remaining specimens are turning up mutated and poisoned. Further up the food chain, bottlenose dolphins have been washing up dead on the shore, and large predator fish populations have developed heart problems as a direct link to the chemicals from the oil and dispersant. Insect populations in marshlands along the Gulf Coast are falling at alarming rates, disrupting the coastal food chains. End quote. Again, entire ecosystems there have been destroyed. And not only the ecosystems and the animals themselves, which is bad enough, but businesses that rely on those ecosystems have been destroyed. Fishermen, restaurants, all of that. And it turns out BP isn't actually the only one who has been dragging their feet when it comes to recovery and response. It turns out, ladies and gentlemen, that the Obama administration is also dragging its feet when it comes to the response of the oil spill that happened 4 years ago. Actually, that's not entirely true. In some ways, they're dragging their feet. In other ways, it's full steam ahead. Hell, just this year, ladies and gentlemen, the Obama administration opened up an additional 112 million acres of the Gulf Coast for oil exploration. 112 million additional acres opened up by President Obama. They opened up the Atlantic coast for oil exploration using a dangerous seismic air blasters that we've talked about before. That's right. Can you guys remember this? So the Obama administration has cleared the use of seismic air blasters in the Atlantic to create earthquakes in the ocean to look for more oil. Drill, baby, drill. That's what Obama is. I've said it again. So look, in that regard, the Obama administration isn't really dragging its feet. They're full steam ahead. They're drill, baby, drill when it comes to actual drilling. Where the Obama administration is dragging their feet is actually when it comes to safety and learning from the disaster that happened in the Gulf. So you may remember one of the big things about the BP Gulf oil spill was that the blowout preventer did not work, which is why the spill went on for almost 3 months. It went on for 87 days, right? So you may remember that the blowout preventer, when we found out that it wasn't working, it turns out that the blowout preventer was never actually tested to work at the ocean depth that BP was using it for. And you would think if you're going to continue to drill, baby, drill in the ocean, if you think you're going to continue doing all this deep water drilling, you might want to fix that little problem of the blowout preventer. And it turns out the administration has not done that. They promised that they would. They promised that they would fix this blowout preventer, but they haven't. In fact, a former Obama administration regulator, the person who actually was the regulator at the time of the oil spill, Elizabeth Birnbaum, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. I'm going to read a chunk of it here. Again, this is the former Obama administration regulator, Elizabeth Birnbaum, from the New York Times, quote, "Following the spill, the administration promised that it would do what was necessary to make drilling as safe as possible. A presidential commission recommended numerous measures to increase drilling safety. The Coast Guard, the Department of the Interior, and the National Academy of Engineering subsequently identified more problems that contributed to the spill. Deepwater Horizon's blowout preventer, quote, was neither designed nor tested for the dynamic conditions that most likely existed at the time that the attempts were made to recapture well control," the report said. More troubling, the shortcomings of Deepwater's equipment may be present at other deepwater drilling operations, the report said. Administration officials promised an immediate response to the NAE report, including regulations to set new standards for blowout preventers by the end of 2012. Today, 16 months after that deadline and 4 years after the blowout, we still have not seen even proposed rules. Deepwater drilling continues in the Gulf. New leases are being offered by the government and sold to energy companies each year, yet the NAE report warned that a blowout in deep water may not be controllable with current technology. End quote. We should be furious about this, ladies and gentlemen. We should be, I'm sorry. Look, what this report is saying is that if the BP spill were to happen again today, if another rig blew out today, we would probably have the same result because the preventers have not been upgraded. The preventers have not been changed. Look, the Obama administration is not only ignoring its own reports, its own recommendations. Not only that, that's bad enough. But the fact that they lied, the fact that there's still, all this offshore drilling, all this deep water drilling that is still unbelievably unsafe. Not only are they ignoring its own safety regulations and reports that they want to do, they've actually opened up more of the Gulf to drilling. Hundreds of millions of more acres. It's open up the Atlantic coast to drilling. That's not safe. And it's not only safe just because of the climate which we talk about. It's not only safe because of the amount of carbon that will be released. It's not only safe because we need to keep these horrible fossil fuels in the ground, but the bloody blowout preventer has not even been fixed for 4 years. 4 years it hasn't been fixed. That is one half of the Obama administration's entire presidency. Half of his presidency has been on dragging his feet on this and doing nothing. If another spill were to happen, if another accident were to happen, it would be Barack Obama's fault for not taking action, for not doing what he promised. It's ridiculous. And I've said this before countless times, folks, and I'll say it again today. President Barack Obama's biggest legacy when he leaves the office of the presidency will be the fact that he is a horrible environmental president. We'll be right back.